As we found out a couple of weeks ago, the Chevrolet Trax is the best-selling subcompact crossover in the US, despite the fact that it's powered by a Turbo 3 and doesn't offer all-wheel drive. It's defying all logic and all the odds to become a great seller in this country. But if you're someone who needs all-wheel drive and you're looking for a vehicle that maybe feels a bit more premium for the interior, but also looks a bit more rugged for the exterior, well, you're in luck, because you don't have to leave the Chevrolet brand. You have the Chevrolet Trailblazer. Now, I personally think that this subcompact crossover is overlooked. It is sitting in the shadow of its younger sibling and more affordable sibling, but also it's overlooked in this market in general. Everyone looks at the Subaru Crosstrek, Honda HR-V, Toyota Corolla Cross, maybe even the Mazda CX-30. But the Trailblazer is actually a very interesting vehicle in its own right, providing some ground clearance, some versatility, and more importantly, that all-wheel drive system. In today's video, we're going to take a good long look at the Trailblazer. Take a look at the exterior, the interior, take it out for a quick test drive, and see why, if you are in the market for a subcompact crossover from Chevrolet, you don't have to go with the Trax. You can go with a Trailblazer and receive a vehicle that might be a bit more fun and adventurous. Now, before we get in this video, I want to give a huge shout and thank you to Copeland Chevrolet in Hudson, Massachusetts for letting me come down here to check out the Chevrolet Trailblazer. Their link will be in the description below, so you can check out their extensive Chevrolet inventory. So as always, let's begin with pricing. For 2025 with the Chevrolet Trailblazer Activ, you're looking at a starting cost of just over $30,500 if you go with all-wheel drive. That's one of the key differences here, aside from the all-wheel drive system, is that the Trailblazer does exceed the $30,000 price bracket, whereas the Trax does not. Now, the all-wheel drive system gives you better versatility and capability in the winter and also when you take on some light trails. But it does go one step further, because if you go with the Activ and the all-wheel drive system, you get 8 inches of ground clearance, which is about 7/10 of an inch better than what you're going to find with that Trax. So right off the bat, what you have here is a more rugged subcompact crossover and a vehicle that, at least on paper and even when you just look at it in person, should be better equipped to take on the Subaru Crosstrek, Honda HR-V, and Toyota Corolla Cross. You notice that with the cladding around the wheel wells, the bumpers, and it just gives you more of this rugged aesthetic that we don't have with that Trax. So the Trax is more of an urban adventure vehicle, whereas the Trailblazer, you might be taking it off-road during the winter when you're going skiing and snowboarding, or maybe even during the summer when you want to go camping. You might be able to do that here with this vehicle. Now let's take a look at the exterior for the Trailblazer and see how it matches up compared to that Trax or other vehicles in this segment. So up front, you are going to receive full LED headlights and LED daytime running lights. Just like the Blazer, it is in 2 separate housings, and we're seeing a lot of this in the Chevrolet lineup, whether it is the Equinox or that Trax. And the Blazer kind of set the tone for the entire lineup, at least in the 2020s. Now, one thing I like here, though, with the Activ is that you're not going to have that bright chrome for the strip that runs through the front grille. It's more of a dark black chrome, which is really nice and goes very well with the yellow paint color we have on our model today. You're going to notice the aggressive front grille as well. That gives you a nice design here and really ties everything together. I would say that this model looks like a baby Blazer, which is to be expected. Those chrome accents make their way to the lower portion of the front bumper, giving you a two-tone look, at least in that regard. So what you have here is a vehicle that does look rather aggressive, but also it looked kind of fun and unique in this market. Making your way over to the side profile, you are going to receive 17-inch alloy wheels, which do a really good job for a subcompact crossover in this market. Now, obviously, there is going to be some road noise here on the highway with this model being boxy and squared off. But in regards to ride quality and ride comfort, it does do a pretty good job for a vehicle in this segment. Now, for our model, we have a two-tone finish here, giving us white side mirror caps and also a white roof, which is pretty unique for a vehicle in this market. I mean, yellow and white, you don't see that too often. There's also some gloss black trim as well for the A and C pillars, which gives you a sportier design to this vehicle. Now, no surprises here. We don't have turn signal indicators for these side mirrors, but we do have blind spot detection for added safety. Then as you make your way around to the back, just like we saw for the front fascia, this is basically a baby version of the Blazer. You see that with the taillights, but with the Activ, they are LED. So full LED setup here for the front and rear, great to see. And you don't get it on the lower trims for for the Trailblazer, so keep that in mind. For the lower portion of the rear bumper, once again, you have the blacked out chrome, which goes really nice here with our model, matches the gloss black trim for the C-pillar, and also it gives you a two-tone look here with that cladding, so really like to see that. And better yet, you are going to have dual exhaust outlets, which gives you that sportier appearance for the final third of this model. Powering the Chevrolet Trailblazer, we have a 1.3-liter turbocharged 3-cylinder engine, producing 155 horsepower and 174 pound-feet of torque, and it is paired with a 9-speed automatic transmission. You can go with front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, and that is the main selling point here and the main difference compared to that Trax, because the Trax is only front-wheel drive. Now with the all-wheel drive system, you have better ground clearance, but also better gearing capability and versatility, making this a better adventure vehicle or fun daily driver compared to that Trax. So I think that if you're someone who thinks that the Trax just isn't enough for you, take a look at the Trailblazer, because at least on paper, you have more horsepower and you have more pound-feet of torque, so it should be a bit more peppy when you are driving on your weekday commutes. Now in regards to fuel economy, you're looking at right around 26 miles per gallon in the city and 29 miles per gallon on the highway, for a combined average of 27 miles per gallon if you go with all-wheel drive. That really isn't too bad out of a vehicle like this. So if you are looking for a crossover that is fuel efficient as well alongside affordability, the Trailblazer falls under that category. Hopping inside the Chevrolet Trailblazer Activ, you're greeted by heated EvoTech seats for both the driver and passenger, with the driver's side having 8-way power adjustability, whereas the passenger will have to manually find the ideal seating position, which is very typical for a subcompact crossover at around $30,000. In regards to the comfort for these seats, there's a decent amount of support, and the cushioning isn't too bad either. So on those longer road trips or weekday commutes, you shouldn't find yourself feeling fatigued being behind the wheel of the Trailblazer. Now, in front of you, you are going to notice that this is a very similar driving environment to the Trax. The only key difference here is that Chevrolet did throw in different interior materials that I think really elevates the driving environment just a bit more here. You feel that on the dashboard, you see that on the door panels and center console. This feels a bit more premium, relatively speaking, and I am using premium as a loose term there. But it does feel a bit nicer being behind the wheel of the Trailblazer than that Trax, which is to be expected since this is a bit more expensive. Now, with this steering wheel, with the Activ, you are going to have a heated steering wheel, which is going to match the heated front seats. So on those colder mornings, you can get yourself nice and warm and toasty. In front of you will be a full digital gauge cluster here with a very similar layout to that Trax. So you can have different gauge layouts, but then also a trip information screen, so you can check out what your average fuel economy is, and it's pretty nice to have. But this isn't going to be in-depth or too intuitive, and we saw that with the Trax too, so I'm not going to reiterate myself too much here. So I think that if you are looking at both vehicles, your experience being behind the wheel isn't going to be too much different in regards to technology. Comfort-wise, that's a bit of a different story. Then taking a look at the infotainment system, you are going to receive an 11-inch touchscreen with wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto compatibility. This isn't the first time we've seen this screen in the Chevrolet lineup, and in fact, it's very cleanly laid out, where its responsiveness is pretty good for a vehicle in this market, but also it's not going to be too in-depth or too difficult to get used to. In fact, I think that if you're not tech savvy, you'll find yourself right at home here, and it should become second nature to use rather quickly. On the left side of the screen will be quick access icons that get you to different menus efficiently, such as your radio, your phone connectivity, but then also information that pertains to your vehicle. So from here, you can check out your maintenance, so such as oil life, but also your tire pressure monitoring system. You'll have your gauge layout here for battery voltage and coolant temperature, and also your trip computer. So from here, you can see your average fuel economy statistics, so pretty much what you have on your digital gauge cluster, which I still think is pretty nice. But you can also access your climate control settings from this screen as well. So you're not going to have dual zone climate control, but you can adjust the temperature, also fan speed, fan direction, AC. You're still going to have physical buttons that do the exact same thing beneath the head unit. So you're going to have your two dials here for the fan speed, fan direction, also your climate control. So if you want more of a tactile experience, you have that here with the Trailblazer. Now when you place a Trailblazer in reverse, you are going to have a rear backup camera with trajectory, but there's only one angle here. So you're not going to have a side view, a top view, or front-facing camera. That's to be expected for a crossover at around $30,000. Continuing on, beneath the head unit, you are going to find a USB-C and USB-A outlet along with a 12-volt outlet and a wireless phone charging pad, which is optional for the Trailblazer and the Activ. We'll get into that in a minute because our Activ has some optional packages equipped for this model. You're going to notice a single row of buttons for your auto start stop, your lane centering, your traction control on and off, your drive mode selector that activates sport mode, and then all-wheel drive if you have all-wheel drive equipped on your Trailblazer. For the center console itself, you will have your gear selector here with electronic parking brake, and it is flanked by gloss black trim, which is very typical for a vehicle in this market. Next to that will be your 2 cup holders, then a storage compartment for some smaller items, maybe a couple key fobs like I have right now. Then for the standard storage compartment, it is somewhat small, but you can store a couple smartphones there if you need to, or possibly some other tech gadgets as well. Now, optional and not equipped on our model today, you can go with a moonroof, but that costs $1,400. And when you factor that into the equation after the optional packages, now you're spending close to $35,000. But let's get into those packages and what they provide. Now, for $395, our model has a driver confidence package, giving us rear park assist, rear cross traffic alert, and lane change alert with blind spot detection. I would say for $400, go for it. That gives you a lot of value and extra safety, so that is a must-have for the Activ. Now, on top of that, and we do not have this particular package, but for $1,000, you can get adaptive cruise control and then upgrade the sound system to the Bose Premium 7-speaker audio system, which will amplify the audio of your favorite music. Is that a must-have? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on what you're looking for out of your next daily driver. And lastly, and a package that we have equipped on our model is the convenience package for $1,195, which gives us a long list of features here that I think goes a long way. You have automatic climate control, also an auto-dimming rear view mirror. You have sliding sun visors and covered illuminated vanity mirrors, a wireless phone charging pad, and hands-free power liftgate, which that right there provides so much value alongside some other creature comforts for the second row, such as your center armrest and then a USB-A and USB-C input. Now, for passengers in the back, what you have here with the Trailblazer really isn't much different than the Trax and then also the Blazer and Equinox, where from the outside, this looks like a very small vehicle. You have the higher roofline thanks to the boxier shape, so headroom isn't going to be an issue. But length, you're probably thinking, all right, how many people can I actually fit back here? And is it going to be conducive for a growing family? Well, in the terms of numbers and how many people you can fit back here, I don't think squeezing in a third person is going to be happening because there's not a lot of width to this crossover, which means you'll be fighting for that shoulder room. But legroom, though, is a bit of a different story because you're going to have right around 39 inches of legroom. And that's better than some compact crossovers out there. So when you have taller passengers sit in the back, one, they won't be hitting their head on the headliner, and two, they will not be feeling cramped or claustrophobic. Now, this seat is adjusted most of the way back, is also somewhat on a recline, and I have a few inches of legroom remaining, but because of the way the seat is shaped and also the way this vehicle is shaped, I do feel a bit more boxed in, but that's to be expected. I do think that if you are looking for an affordable, family-friendly crossover from Chevrolet, you don't want a vehicle that is going to be large or over $30,000 or into the $40,000 price bracket. What you have with the Trailblazer gives you some flexibility in that regard. I also still think that's better than the Chevrolet Trax, but we'll get into that for the test drive portion of this review. Also back here, you're not going to receive 2 center-mounted air vents, not too much of a surprise for a vehicle in this market and for a vehicle of this size. However, you are going to receive a 3-pronged outlet, which is very surprising, a USB-C and USB-A outlet, and then to round out the second row seating area, you do get a center armrest with 2 cup holders through that optional package. Now, making our way around to the back one more time to take a look at the rear cargo area. With the Trailblazer, as I mentioned before, we do have a power liftgate. And inside, behind the second row seats, you're looking at right around 25.3 cubic feet of room, which is very good for a vehicle in this market. It matches what you have with the Chevrolet Trax, but is a bit better than the Mazda CX-30 and Subaru Crosstrek, but does fall short of that Nissan Kicks, which is now the class leader in this market. But with 25.3 cubic feet of room, you can easily store all your luggage back here with very limited issues. So I think you could probably store 8 or 9 bags of luggage, and that's pretty good for a vehicle of this size. You can go on those road trips with the family or significant other. Now, I do notice the indentations for the rear cargo cover, so that way if you do have valuable items like myself with camera gear, you can leave them back here and have that peace of mind knowing that no one will be able to peek in and steal what you have. Also, on both sides of the rear cargo area, you do have some cubbies for some smaller items, such as a couple water bottles, car detail equipment, or maybe even a first aid kit. And beneath the floor mat, you are going to find a spare tire. So if you encounter a flat on those road trips or travels, you can fix that and be back on the road. And then finally, with the second row seats folded, you're looking at right around 54.4 cubic feet of room, which falls right in line with most of its competitors. So what you have here with the Trailblazer is a small crossover that looks rather rugged and fun, but also pretty practical as well. The Chevrolet Trailblazer finds itself in a very interesting situation. For one, it has a successful sibling in the Trax, which has become the best-selling subcompact crossover in the US. But then also for the Trailblazer, it has to go head-to-head with its own sibling and against the Honda HR-V, Toyota Corolla Cross, Subaru Crosstrek, and other subcompact crossovers that offer all-wheel drive. That is the main selling point for the Trailblazer. It's all-wheel drive, it's a bit more rugged, maybe a bit more adventurous and fun. But when you take a look at the interior, pretty much the same technology with the infotainment system and digital gauge cluster. So what exactly makes this vehicle special, and why would you go with the Trailblazer over that Trax? Well, it's more than what you're going to find on paper, because sure, you have better ground clearance at 8 inches with the Activ and the all-wheel drive system. So better versatility, better capability than that Trax. The all-wheel drive system will definitely help out for sure. But on top of that, though, you have a slightly different Turbo 3. And one thing I've noticed here with this Turbo 3 and this 9-speed automatic, it's a bit more athletic, it's a bit more fun. It's also a crossover that will surprise you, because you look at the power figures, 155 horsepower, 174 pound-feet of torque, Turbo 3, and you're like, alright, so this really shouldn't surprise me or impress me in any way, shape, or form. But interestingly enough, there's a lot of low-end torque out of this powertrain that adds a lot of fun factor, surprisingly, for a vehicle in this market, where you are going to have a lot of confidence entering highways, passing slower drivers, also even just accelerating off the line. This is not going to be a fast vehicle by any stretch of the imagination, but it is going to be a fun daily driver with traditional automatic, because so many competitors in this market use CVTs. This 9-speed is actually quick shifting. That's one thing you're going to notice immediately here, is that it's very quick shifting. There's also a lot of refinement here with this powertrain and transmission. Now, of course, with the Trailblazer, and especially the Activ, you're coming in at over $30,000. So this better impress you in more ways than one. Well, one thing I'm noticing here with this model is that the suspension, the chassis, and this platform does feel pretty nice. It's tuned differently than the Trax. With the Trax, it feels very car-like. Whereas with the Trailblazer, this is somewhat of a small subcompact crossover that feels very much like a Subaru Crosstrek. Now, am I going to say the Trailblazer is a better crossover than the Crosstrek? No, not at all. I actually think that the Trailblazer is a better choice than the Trax, most because of what it's offering in regards to performance, the all-wheel drive system, and the ground clearance, but Americans are disagreeing with me on that. Although, the Trailblazer is starting to see some traction here in the US, reaching over 100,000 units sold in 2024, and I'm beginning to understand why. When you get behind the wheel of this vehicle for the first time, yes, you're going to notice all the road noise here. But it is going to be an SUV that is quite responsive. And it's not only in the straight line speed, but it's also with the handling and maneuverability. This vehicle does feel very light on its feet, and because of that, you have a very light steering feel here. So it's somewhat vague, it's somewhat light, but it's going to give you some feedback, some fun factor in the corners. Now, as we enter the highway here and reach highway speeds, I want to see how this vehicle feels on the roadways, because the Trax had a lower center of gravity and felt somewhat planted and also exhibited the car-like driving experience and demeanor. Now, the Trax, on the other hand, at 65 miles an hour, with the seat positioning, the way the suspension feels, this doesn't feel as connected to the roads, and you feel that. Now, that might give you a bit more confidence when you are taking on snow-covered roadways, when you're taking on the elements. This feels like a vehicle that you could take on some trails during the summer, or maybe, you know, when you're skiing and snowboarding during the winter, you can take on some of those elements. The Trax, I just wouldn't be eager to do that. Now, at 70 miles an hour, road noise is what you would expect. It is quite audible in here. And obviously with the Trailblazer, with its boxier shape, you're going to notice the wind noise. You're going to notice a lot more of those outside elements make its way into the cabin compared to the Trax. But that's perfectly okay for a vehicle in this market. A lot of vehicles in this market have underpowered, naturally aspirated four-cylinder engines, and maybe even some low-powered turbo 4s. Whereas the Trailblazer, you know, this Turbo 3 isn't begging for power. It's not gasping for air, and that's what's really surprising here with this model. It doesn't skip a beat. And even for a Turbo 3, you know, there's not a lot of turbo lag when you are accelerating. And it's also a vehicle that is definitely going to surprise you. You know, I think this kind of reminds me of a Mazda CX-30 in a way. Maybe not necessarily a turbo CX-30, but definitely the naturally aspirated version. This is most certainly more fun than the Honda HR-V with the CVT. And I do think it's a bit more peppy than the Subaru Crosstrek, at least off the line. You know, I think if we were to, you know, go back to back on some of these vehicles in a straight line speed, I think other crossovers would eventually pass the Trailblazer. But off the line, this feels a bit more spry and peppy. Now, in regards to overall vision being behind the wheel of the Trailblazer, nice panoramic view. A-pillars are somewhat aggressive, so you might have some blind spots when you are approaching intersections or red lights. Taking a look at your side mirrors, they are decently sized. I can see what's my blind spots and the lane next to me. And looking out back, because the Trailblazer is pretty much like a lifted hatchback, I can see what's directly behind me there. Also, for seat positioning, this is another key difference here between the Trailblazer and Trax. You sit a bit higher up off the ground, giving you that traditional crossover feel. This does feel somewhat more rugged. I'm not going to say that in comparison this kind of feels like a Jeep Renegade, but it definitely has more of an SUV or crossover feel and tendency to it that some of you might actually prefer over that Chevrolet Trax. But all in all, though, this test drive and spending some time with the Trailblazer really answered my biggest question, and that is there redundancy between the Trax and Trailblazer? And I just don't think there is. They drive completely differently, despite the fact that everything you see on paper would suggest otherwise. I like the fact that this vehicle has its own characteristic, it has its own personality, and it shines through immediately when you get behind the wheel for the first time. While I still think the Subaru Crosstrek is the best subcompact crossover out there in this market, just in regards to the value when it's offering, especially now with a 2.5 in the premium, the Trailblazer, I think it's overlooked, though. I do think it's overlooked, because no one ever considers this when they're cross-shopping it with an HR-V, Toyota Corolla Cross, that Subaru Crosstrek, maybe even the Nissan Kicks now. But what you have here with the Trailblazer is something that is pretty cool. It's a cool little vehicle. You get it in unique colors like we have here today. And I just personally think that in regards to the versatility and capability, this might be a better choice for someone on a stricter budget, and maybe for someone who does live in the city. This is a very maneuverable vehicle due to its size, and that makes it a great companion if you do live in the city or suburbs. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this quick review for the 2025 Chevrolet Trailblazer Activ. If you did, please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys next time.